Madelyn Banks. 20% of all married women suffer abuse at the hands of their husbands. According to a survey I have conducted, everyone in this room has witnessed an unhealthy relationship and has learned about unhealthy relationships in Health 10 with our health teacher, Mrs. Kennedy. Battered women syndrome is a mental condition that is used as a legal defense. First, I will explain what battered women syndrome is and the symptoms that occur. Second, I will explain the cycles and theories of battered women syndrome. And finally, I will explain how battered women syndrome is used within the law. So let's begin by looking at the battered women syndrome itself. Battered women syndrome is the classification of the psychological effects from domestic violence towards women. According to research conveyed by Lenore E.A. Walker, a psychologist who was inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame in 1987 for winning the Distinguished Media Award in 1979, published Battered Women Syndrome on January 23, 2014, which states that battered women syndrome is directly linked to post-traumatic stress disorder. Battered women syndrome has many symptoms, such as isolation, anxiety, avoidance, and depression. Gahana Disha and Akush Sakadeva, professors at Lovely Professional University and Fortress Escorts Heart Institute, both having PhDs in non-invasive cardiology, published Battered Women Syndrome on September 11, 2015, which states that women may experience a decline in daily skills that are necessary to live independently, which causes the women to depend more on their abusers. Now that I've told you the definition of battered women syndrome, I will now talk to you about the Walker cycle of violence and Seligman's theory of learned helplessness. Zoe Craven, a research assistant for Family Violence Clearinghouse, wrote the article Battered Women Syndrome in 2003, which states that there are 3 cycles to the Walker cycle of violence of battered women syndrome. The first stage is a tension building stage. During this stage, the victim is exposed to verbal, emotional, and physical abuse, but will try to pass by the situation. As the cycle continues, the tension in the relationship grows, but the victim will continue to try to avoid conflict until stage 2 occurs, the battering incident. During stage 2, the victim is now starting to see the danger that is consuming their relationship and the risk of death or serious injury that may follow. The final stage to the Walker cycle of violence is the loving contrition stage. During this stage, the batterer fills the victim's head with empty promises and promises to change. In Seligman's theory of learned helplessness, in research conveyed by Lenore E.A. Walker, a psychologist who was inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame in 1987 for winning the Distinguished Media Award in 1979, published The Battered Women Syndrome in 2016, which states that the reason these women cannot leave their abusers is over time they are put through continuous battering, which diminishes their way to respond to their own thoughts or to escape. These women soon become delirious to what is happening around them until the batterer has complete control over them entirely. Now that I've told you about the Walker cycle of violence and Seligman's theory of learned helplessness, I will now talk to you about the purpose of the battered women syndrome within the law. The purpose of battered women syndrome defense is to help the jury understand the women's perception of the situation and the incidents that occurred during the crime. University of Maryland Law Journal, established in 2001, reported Porter v. State in 2018, which states the story of Miss Porter, who hired a man to kill her husband after she endured abuse for many years. Some of the abuse entailed was being beaten with a belt, being stabbed in the abdomen with a drill, and having a gun pointed to her head on multiple occasions. When tried in court, Ms. Porter explained that she feared for her life and thought she only had 2 options, her life or his. Ms. Porter was later convicted guilty by the jury for murder in the first degree, use of a handgun in the commission of a violent crime, conspiracy of murder in the first degree, and 3 counts of solicitation to commit murder. The battered women syndrome is a mental condition that is used as a legal defense. First, I explained what battered women syndrome is and the symptoms that occur. Second, I explained the cycles and theories of battered women syndrome. And finally, I explained how battered women syndrome is used within the law. 20% of all married women suffer abuse at the hands of their husbands. Bringing that statistic to life, 6 people in this room will suffer abuse at the hands of their spouse. Don't become a statistic.
140.